Hey guys, welcome back. We have a video for you here. A review of No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. Yes, that's his real name, Dick Schwartz. The founder of Internal Family Systems Therapy. I received several questions about this. Thank you guys for these. And Misc and MisEmpire.com if you have any questions. I'll happily do a video on whatever you ask. Not that I'm going to. I don't guarantee that. But if it's a good question, I will. If you're a client, then I'll definitely do it. So, internal family systems model. I did a video a couple months ago on family systems therapy. I guess I got the topic wrong. But it is interesting because in graduate school, I was able to disabuse family systems therapy in a minute. It took the founder of internal family systems therapy, Richard Schwartz, Dickie Schwartz. That's why I think that's really what he goes by. It took him years to disabuse family systems models. So what does that say about his version of therapy versus mine? I wonder. But yeah, my initial thoughts are this is a lot better than CBT. At least it tries to get more to the root of what's going on. And I kind of feel like a brother in arms with this guy because he never explicitly calls out CBT in his book. But he does effectively. It's like he can't say CBT. It's like the therapy hegemony that cannot be named. Because I think so many people are deeply entrenched in CBT, and so many people put it in their philosophy or psychology today bios that you look like a kook when you call it out. But yeah, I already posed that question. He disabused family systems therapy through experience by realizing that this doesn't work. I disabused it in 3.5 minutes in graduate school, realizing that the principles are wrong. So what does this mean about the difference between the IFS model and the Animus model? This is an interesting question going in. And I think it'll give indications of what's wrong with the IFS model. Although I do think he gets some things correct here, and what can I say? I want to be friends with the guy. I'm pathetic. So the outline here, we'll go through an IFS summary if you've never heard of it. But this book, No Bad Parts, came out in 2021, and it's really popular. So good for him. I'm not jealous at all. There's the good. We'll go through the good of the therapy, then the bad. I have some miscellaneous thoughts and takeaways. So let's get to it. IFS summary. It says that the neurosis, when you experience a neurosis, this is in fact an adaptation. Wow. What a novel. Thank you. I mean, he took that from Jung. By the way, he never mentions Jung once in this book, though he takes several of his ideas explicitly. By the way, I take Jung's ideas too, but at least I mention them. I'm like, well, go to my website, go to the store. You can download any of the notes on the collective works. Sometimes a paragraph by a paragraph. For free. Go get them. I did this. It's like a tribute, my shrine to Jung. So you can take his ideas, but acknowledge that he was the one who thought of them, not you. The neurosis as an adaptation is Jung. No, don't just try to repress that supposed negative thought. Don't just try to repress that supposed negative emotion. There's information there. It's telling us something. So that's a great idea, even though he took it from Jung and never references him. Then we go through. Then there's exiles. Exiles are repressed aspects of ourselves, memories, fears, emotions, impulses, desires. Okay, why don't you just call these repressed parts of us? Why do you have to say exiles? I don't know. There's some jargon here. I'm going to get into the negative parts. Then we have protectors, which are just defenses, and they protect us from the exiles, these things that we think we cannot exist with, or if people knew about them, then they wouldn't like us. Then we have managers and firefighters. A manager is a lesser payoff, as I would define it. Something that distracts you from the main issue, and a firefighter would be a greater payoff, like drug addiction. So we have exiles, protectors. And what he talks about is, hey, we need to objectify the importance of objectifying. I guess this goes along with neurosis as an adaptation, sort of. We need to objectify our demons. see how we experience something that, in a way, everybody experiences, but now we're the ones experiencing it. And we need to see how they work to protect us. How they seem to have our best interests at heart, like the devouring Oedipal mother. But they don't. Now, we needed the devouring Oedipal mother when we were 6 months old. We don't need it when we're 6 or 16, 26. It gets even older than that, and it's really sad. And then there's blending, which is when you are still attached to the neurosis, in effect. And the process of unblending is unblending from your protectors, unblending from the payoff, which means getting to the root of the neurosis, according to him. I don't think he does. He tries, and he does better than cognitive behavioral therapy. But this is, when you see that you are the neurosis, which is a strange word to use because blend feels like a positive connotation to me. Blend feels like a positive connotation. Integrate, blend, take your disparate parts and put them together. Blend feels positive, but for him, and I think, I'm not just advertising my sensibilities here, I think for him, that's an indication of why where IFS falters, is because he would use blend as a negative connotation. Okay, so let's look at the good in IFS, and there's plenty of good. I mean, the first part is there's a healthy mind-body connection here. I mean, that's implied in the title, no bad parts. You think you have these parts that are bad, but guess what? They're not. You just don't understand it. Are you irrational? Sure. We can look at the outside and say, wow, you act in an irrational way. That's not going to be good for you, yet you still do it. You can't really stop doing that thing. It's not necessarily bad. I will be right back. Okay, I feel much better. Thank you for asking. So, no bad parts, no degradation of the body. It's because you have an impulse, a desire from the body. It doesn't make it bad. Now, you can do bad things with it. Just because you have a negative emotion doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with it. Oh, you feel jealousy? You may not be wrong. That, in fact, may be adaptive for you. Not that you need to continue it, but you need to understand how your old self, your maybe 8-year-old, 14-year-old self, needed that at a point, and now you don't. So another way of saying this, I guess, is that ask why. It doesn't take the phenomenon at face value. And he saw this experientially. There's this great story of him arguing with a client who he had who was self-harming, cutting herself, I think. And he would argue with the symptoms. Now, you know how CBT does it. CBT, the classic approach, how it does it, argues with the symptoms. It says, well, this doesn't make sense. You need to stop doing it. Look, you're going to die, all this stuff. And after all these sessions, she continued to cut herself. And in fact, it got worse. Of course it got worse when you understand psychology and how it works. So he saw, wait, maybe you're here, that these symptoms are here to protect something. Now he does ask why, not down to first principles. He only goes so far. And he talks about the diagnosis, the DSM-5, or any DSM diagnosis. It's like, that doesn't really help us. He asked these good questions of, but how do you treat it? What's really going on? And when we learn what's really going on, this informs how we treat it. He doesn't say that explicitly, but implicitly he does. He doesn't really know what's going on. He gets deeper than CBT, which, Wade Pool is deeper than CBT. And he tries to think in systems conceptually. He tries, I would say ultimately fails, but he tries. I feel like a brother in arms with him because he got frustrated by the same things I got frustrated with. Now, it took me a couple months of graduate school. I don't think it's because I'm smarter. I'm pretty smart, but I don't think it's because I'm smarter. It's because I approached it differently, a way that he does not approach it. And he has a healthy view of spirituality. He sees religion as a psychological metaphor, and he really gets the point of or the relationship. Again, it's not clear. it's not really clear, but you can see him starting to understand the relationship between therapy and religion. Therapy is this thing we engage in through which we develop our own religious experience. And talk about that in therapy, and that's how we connect with people. That's what small r religion is. So he sees it all as a psychological metaphor. He gets why we seek therapy in the first place, because we make decisions that we don't want to make, and we can't stop making decisions that we do want to stop making. Now, he doesn't come out and say this explicitly. Maybe I look like an autist because I feel like I do, but I really think we got to get clear and open about what's going on with us. And not just take it for granted that we have this thing, therapy, and we, quote, should have it because we've had it. Maybe we shouldn't. I think we should, but not because we've had it, but because it serves a function based on who humans are, based on what we are, based on the nature of our consciousness, based on the idea that there could be things in our consciousness that are affecting us outside of our awareness, which makes sense because there's lots of things in our consciousness. Thankfully, we have this great big consciousness with tons of information, but we can't be aware of it at all times. Especially when you see how our body does, anything. Like anytime we're in any kind of physical pain, our body goes through this whole process to protect us from the pain. That's what endorphins are. That's why when you go on a run, old fat people, when you do like a turkey trot on Thanksgiving, you get a runner's high. It's because you're in pain. I think the guy from Kenya, he probably doesn't get a runner's high. This is just how you feel normally. But he doesn't. And the other thing, again, which is implied, I think we're seeing the theme here. He's going in the right direction, a little bit unclear. It's implied that you can do IFS with any therapist. Now, there are IFS therapists, but you could potentially just do it with any therapist you want. He gets that. He gets that that's what the final form of therapy is it doesn't rely on the therapist being one particular way. That's not really therapy. That's religion in the negative connotation. And he gets that there's healthy needs and unhealthy needs. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he understands that unhealthy needs protect us, while healthy needs expose us. Healthy needs mean you're going around in a trench coat and exposing yourself. No. But you know what I mean. And then the only way to develop purpose, Scott, right there. The only way to develop a purpose is to manage your baggage first. He understands that too. He understands that if you want to develop like a mission or goal for your life, it's a organic process. You don't just sit in a room and it comes to you. I mean, maybe it does after you've already been engaged in a process, but if you're spending most of your day harassing live streamers, you're probably not in a good place, a good psychological place. You probably have not yet stepped to the psychological plinth from which a purpose will be more natural. So, he moves away from the concrete of CBT and goes a little bit deeper, but as he goes deeper, he becomes more vague. And what this creates ultimately is problems that led to the rise in CBT in the first place. And let's look at how that happens with the badge. So the first aspect that it could not fully extirpate from his mind, because I think he was groomed in the family systems model, is collectivism. Well, now there's mixed collectivism, because he's unclear about that key concept in psychology that people just kind of brush over: responsibility. The problem here is he conflates existential responsibility with psychological responsibility. He thinks that responsibility is taking responsibility, is seeing how you are at fault, the F word in psychology, you are at fault for your situation. And that's not necessarily true. And when I challenge clients to take responsibility, I mean, sometimes you are, responsible for your situation. In fact, in certain contexts, you're responsible for a lot of your situation. But that's not what therapy is about. Therapy is about taking responsibility for your psychology. Taking responsibility for the emotions you have about whatever situation you happen to be in. And only from there can we get this pure kind of individualism. And without that, you're going to get collectivism mixed in there. We'll see how that happens. Because it comes down to what's the cause of your neurosis. Is it your mom who neglected you? Is that the cause of your neurosis? And now you have a difficult time with your own emotions because you're supposed to learn how to integrate them into your psyche by, developing a relationship with your mom, but your mom was out to lunch. Is that the cause? Well, he seems to think that it is, because he doesn't cite anything else. And he says explicitly that the reason why you are this way is because your mom blankety blank blank. But that's not the cause. Your mom put that neurosis in you, yes, but so that would be the cause if you were a robot and she programmed you, but you're not a robot. You have this thing called consciousness, without which psychology would not exist as a field in the first place. Well, definitely not therapy. Psychology would still kind of exist for humans, but even then it would kind of be pointless. Yeah, your mom put that issue in you. You perpetuate that issue, though. That's the cause of your neurosis. Oh, wait, you didn't know. Yeah, your mom didn't know either. So by you saying, well, I didn't know, you're saying your mom should have known because she's your mom. So now that's projection, clearly. And I think he can't do this because he just can't sift through the family systems for the gold that is there. He just throws it away and says, well, that's all the family has gone internal. That's why it's called internal family systems. You create these relationships with your different parts, different members of your family, your internal family, and that's how you grow and develop in therapy. But the golden family systems therapy is, well, okay, so it's not true that you are, well, now it's how it's popularly said, you are the 5 closest people who you have relationships with. You take their identities and you kind of amalgam them, make an amalgamation of them. I don't think amalgam's a verb, but you get your identity. No, that's not true. That is very close to being true. And wait, don't throw that thought out just because it's false, because there's a truth there, and that truth is your identity is the relationship you have with the 5 closest people, not the 5 closest people. Your relationship with them. That, I guarantee you, is your identity. All I got to do is audit your 5 closest relationships, which has nothing to do with the other people. Well, what does have to do with the other people is just an effect of the cause, which is how you relate with them. So I could see this leading to horror story fights based on these IFS ideas. Like this couple, let's say, goes to IFS therapy together and they both learn about their parts. Well, that doesn't tell you how to take responsibility psychologically for the parts that you do have. Then it's just going to be in a back and forth of, well, my part did that. Well, my part did that. Are you really taking responsibility? I mean, he doesn't come out and say it explicitly. And of course, if I interviewed him, he would say, oh, no, I don't say that. But if you're unclear about it, that's what's going to happen, is people will say, well, my part did this, and the implication will be, I'm not responsible for that. Now, you're more aware of what's going on, true, but unless you can learn what responsibility really is in a psychological context, which is not the same as responsibility in a legal context, let's say, or a philosophical, ethical context, then you're just going to just totally fumble the issue. And where is the issue? Is it external or internal? And so what would it mean if his theory informs collectivism? What would it mean if his theory informs collectivism? That would mean exactly that. That he doesn't understand this responsibility. So with collectivism, of course, in therapy, which is implicitly about the individual, there's a compensation for collectivism, and that comes out with his worldview or politics, and I'm going to say more about this in a bit, but he uses world unity. He doesn't think that individual unity, it sort of is. That individual unity is the point. He thinks that it's about world unity, and he uses world unity as a replacement for the inner world. There are no bad parts of your mind, but apparently there are bad parts of society. He talks about that, like patriarchy, racism, individualism, materialism. He says those explicitly. So you are not one, but humanity is one, and we need to delete the scourge of these four negative feedback loops to overcome them and create unity among mankind. And he constantly talks about the myth of the mono-mind, but he conflates this with consciousness. The myth of the mono-mind is people thinking that their conscious is in control, and only their conscious is in control. Their conscious mind. Conscious as I spell it out there. CONS. CIOUS. But the mono-mind is the point of the conflict, is the point of therapy, is to live without conflict. That's our oldest myth, is to be Jesus-like is, in a sense, to live without conflict. To be godlike is to integrate all your seemingly disparate parts into a coherent whole. Yes, none of our parts are bad, but how do we put those parts together? He never gets to that. And this invariably undercuts his monism, because vagueness leads to dualism. If you're vague about an issue, if you don't really get it, you're going to be much more likely to blame it on somebody else. And this leads to, of course, the CBT, the mind-body dichotomy, that he recognizes there's a problem. But I don't care if you think there's a problem. If you don't know how to manage that problem, if you're unclear about what that problem is, then you're not going to get rid of it. It's always going to be there. Okay, we're done there. And then the jargon, that's another problem, but I think this is just a result of the lack of clarity. Like, why would you call it an exile, a protector? These are just repressed parts of ourselves. Why would you call them, protectors? Why are there two different kinds of protectors and one's simply more aggravated than the other? Aren't they both just protectors and one's just more severe? Why are they different? Why does that need to be different? Just because they're different in quantity doesn't mean they're different in quality, in kind. But the jargon is due to vagueness, of course, because he doesn't really, he built this view of therapy not based on theory. He's openly antithetical. He's openly hostile. Not hostile is a strong word, but intellectually hostile, at least, to theory. He based this therapeutic approach solely on his experience working with clients, which, of course, you need that experience to develop a theory, but if you can't integrate properly, if you can't integrate those ideas properly, then you're going to get a bunch of jargon. For instance, part of the therapy here is going inside and asking what the inner critic is and what it's trying to say and what it's telling you. I don't need to ask you. I know what the inner critic is. Now, we still need to talk about it because you need to develop a extremely nuanced relationship with that inner critic. You need to use words that mean something to you exactly. That is important. But I don't need to ask you what your inner critic is. I mean, I'll guide you there. I'm not going to come out and tell you in therapy. I'm a little bit more, soft than that. But I don't need to be there to tell you that, which is why I'm going to this new model of therapy in the first place. Check past couple of videos. I talk about that more. I tell you what it is, and we talk through the nuance, and what it is and what it means are two different things. There could be a protective reason why you have that inner critic, but that doesn't tell you what the threat is that you avoid. Because inner critic is anxiety, P.S. Okay, so there's jargon due to vagueness. Another problem is, vague solipsistic therapy process. A lot of it is imagining, sitting alone, calming your mind, imagining. Like if you came across somebody, say, I have an example here, you put them in a room, so you put them in one of those police interrogation rooms that they have in movies where there's a one-way mirror and you're interrogating them, and there's probably, you can talk with them, but your voice is distorted, so they can't tell who you are. So imagine putting that sad person in a room like that, and then have them do whatever it is that sad people do that triggers you, and then how would you talk to it? How would you speak to it? Some of this. It's very, it doesn't helpful for me because it's very, it's just out of context. Like, if I'm thinking about somebody, even in my life, who's triggered me, and I take them and I put them in a room, that immediately drops the context of the situation which I'm triggered, and then I'm no longer bothered by it. It's like, we need to remove this person from the real world in order to learn what it is that bothers you. No, you need to put them in a real world context. And that informs how you communicate in that real world context to work through the issue. Now, you don't start there, you start in therapy. That's why you have it in the first place. So there's really no how. He says, yeah, you take these people and you put them in a room, and I guess you just kind of talk with them while they're in that room. And there's exercises in the book. You can go through them. I mean, it was very, I would need, a whole pharmacy full of Adderall and black coffee to pay attention to this. And the problem here, one of the problems this leads to is he's unable to connect the past with the present. Okay, so there's this issue that happened in the past, and it's affecting your present. But what exactly is that issue in the past, and how does that inform exactly how you communicate it in the present? He doesn't talk about that. He said, well, you just kind of go in the past, and you work on your self-criticism, and then in the present, the self-criticism will come up less, or it'll be less deleterious to your relationships. And I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's how it works. If you're able to do the meditations in the first place, I cannot. I mean, these meditations, look, let's just be honest. They're fruity. They give therapy a bad name. This is exactly why people want to avoid therapy in the first place, is because you come into the room and they want you to imagine yourself as a leaf floating down a river to get you in a calm place where you can talk through things. No, I need to be in the hyped up space. Because I'm triggered. And I need to use those issues that come up when I'm triggered to talk through it. Otherwise, I'm not really talking through the issue. And I think that's what my therapy, I think I say that later on. I don't know. It's been a bit since I made these notes, so I think I talk that later on. I mean, that's what I love about my therapy. I love that about my therapy. I love it. Because an issue is in the past. Yes, if it's also in the present, it's also in the future. Like, if you're bullied in 7th grade and you have regrets of how your life turned out because of, let's say you were bullied in 7th grade, that's really not the problem, but even if you think that is the problem, and you think you can't go back and work on it, it's like, dude, you totally can. Is time real? I really don't know. It might not even be real. And this could be one instance of it not being real, because when you manage the emotional issue that the bullying caused, like, kowtowing to more a Chad Alpha boss or something in a room, but when you confront that issue in the meeting with the boss, you are managing the issue in the past, and obviously you're managing it for the future. It's like that. It's emotionally, you're emotionally in the past and the present at the same time. Which is why I think what that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, or Everything Everywhere All at Once, I don't know. I think that's what it tried to capture. I think the device that it tried to do that was bad and took me out of the movie, but whatever. And then there's, of course, a lot of Jungian plagiarism here. And it says, you know what? When people have these bad parts and they do these meditations, they realize that these bad parts, their inner critic, they have bodies. And they show up as monsters. Oh, can you believe it? Oh, you mean like demons? You mean like the projection that is demons? That's what you're talking about, what Jung talks about all the freaking time. He says self with a capital S, like he's the first one to think of it, even though Jung was making a clear religious, small r religious point when he, chose to write self as with a capital S. This to me is, so I have it there. This is the equivalent of saying, I thought of this new idea, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Wow, what a good idea, huh? Let's say you thought Marxism was a good idea, and not citing Marx at all. You just look like an idiot. There's just more vagueness here. Like he says, self-leadership is the centerpiece of IFS, and he has all these C's of self-leadership like courage and confidence and compassion and connectedness. All this the lame crap we talk about here, but it's just vague. So you gotta be a self-leader, but then you criticize individualism. You say that individualism is like one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. He says it explicitly. This isn't just like an off... he's not just ranting. He really means that. And then it just leads to, I don't know. He just has some strange ideas about the self. Like he thinks that yourself already exists within you when you're born. Like, no, it doesn't. The drive to create a self does, but yourself doesn't. That needs to be created. And the idea that neurosis has a function, of course, is directly from Jung. There's no integration here. It's unable to see how, seemingly different parts that aren't bad. He sees how they're not bad, but he can't put them into a pattern because he doesn't get what emotions are. And the dude's just wacky. He just inserts his political opinions, and it's no relevance whatsoever. And I know I talk about politics here, but I try to do it in a way that informs what's going on with us psychologically. Wait 1 second, I'll be right back. Yeah, so as I was saying, he's just a wacky guy. And I think this is because he is, openly, at least intellectually hostile to integration, to theory, to concepts. And so there's a compensation for that. So he's going to get crazy and wacky theories and concepts. So this book came out in 2021. He thinks COVID is some kind of message from Gaia. I don't know if he literally thinks that, but he thinks that's a good way to interpret that. And because COVID is a message from Gaia saying, hey, we're interfering with nature too much, we need to not interfere with nature as much. He thinks social activism is therapy. Social activism, by definition of what therapy is the complete opposite of therapy. It is not therapy. Now, maybe social activism is good for you in a certain context. I don't know, but that's not therapy. You're not ready for therapy if that's what you're doing. He's openly hostile to Milton Friedman and says that his ideas lead to this cutthroat competition. It just clearly, from my perspective, just not understanding what Milton Friedman was about. He makes these comments about Trump, of course, and he says that if he met Trump, again, like, I'm not a Trump supporter, but you gotta realize how stupid you look when you criticize Trump in the way you do. And he says, well, if he met Trump, he would want to shame him, which he does admit isn't the right way to go about it, not because it's wrong, but because it wouldn't get through to Trump very well. What he would rather do is talk with him about his protectors. Dude, what are you talking about? Trump's not even president anymore when he wrote this book. He sounded like a nutcase. And then he potentially lessens the seriousness of pedophilia by calling it a bad part of you that needs to be worked on, which I agree, by the way. I think it's not like you're a especially evil person. Maybe you are evil, but there's nothing especially evil about you. And I do think that pedophilia is some kind of unconscious reaction to childhood trauma. Of course it is. But you got to qualify it and say, just because these people aren't criminals in the way we typically think, we still need to separate them from society. That's important. And just the fact that he doesn't feel the need to qualify that in any way, it just kind of rubs... I'm not saying, obviously, he's not that, but it's just, dude, you're wacky. And there is a culture war here. There is a culture war at stake, and he's on one side of it, but he doesn't know he's on one side. Okay, this is classic compensation for empiricism guy, of lack of integration guy, of the Sam Harris types. Classic compensation. And then what happens is their ideas are indistinguishable from Shirley MacLaine. Yeah. So this is not very surprising, right? Because it's a compensation. It's that this guy's who think competition is war, but he's involved in the ultimate competition and he just doesn't know it. Yeah, he criticizes Milton Friedman up here for promoting competition. Like, competition is not one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. He just has, again, he's like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get how this works. He thinks competition is like war. That is what right. It's not war at all. If you were to make an image of the concept of competition, it would be, I don't think it would be an exact ballet, but it would be a lot more, it would look a lot more like a ballet than a war. There'd be a lot more working together in grace and beauty than. Now you can point to, competition, free market competition where it is war, but guess what? It's not free market competition at that point. It's competing governments. It would look like one side is buying off, if we're going to extend it to the war, sport, ballet analogy. It would look like one side is buying off the referee. And that's unfair. Why is the one side able to buy off the referee? Milton Friedman talks about that. He's very good. I don't agree with all those economists, but he's a good one. Anyway, and a miscellaneous point here. So this is what I was saying about trans people last week. It's this recognition that's no bad parts. Okay, that's good. Yeah, you're recognizing that this anima, if you're a trans woman, or this animus, if you're a trans man, you're recognizing these parts are with you and they're not bad, but you're not integrating them very well. I think it's because society as a whole, we're just yoked down by this false dichotomy. And I think there's this racism part where I don't know if it's him saying it or somebody else, but somebody admitting that they're racist, that they have racist ideas, and how, I can't believe that this is a bad part of me, but we're going to do the brave thing and talk through it anyways. And it just came off as hilarious to me. Of course, unintentionally hilarious. The stuff that was said just ends up being like racist jokes, which maybe you can say they're not funny or they're not, they're cringe now, but it's just funny to me. I'm sorry, just from my perspective, anybody who can really work through their no bad parts, really do the shadow work and work through this stuff, when the racism comes up, guess what? It's funny. It's hilarious. Is racism tragic? Yeah, everything tragic is hilarious. So, my takeaways here. He's going in the right direction. A lot better than CBT. And if you're interested in these ideas, I would say run with them. But there's still a lot of disintegration here, because he only developed it based on experience. Because can't think. And try the exercises. I would say maybe they work for you. Get this book and get them. Maybe it work for you. I mean, if I was going to write my first book now, and I had to, I don't think I would, but if I had to put IFS into my model, I would say I would just put it as a technique in the self-awareness chapter, no different than the empty chair technique. He talks about the empty chair technique in this book and how helpful it is, and I agree. I've used it prolifically. I know it sounds really queer, but I do empty chair technique with like a 10, 12-year-old version of myself. I have pictures of myself when I'm about that age up here, just to remind me of like, what does this kid want? What does he need? Let me talk to him. I know that sounds fruity, and it is fruity, but that's why it's not an entire therapy. It's just a technique in a larger approach. But because he only goes so deep, and because when he tries to go deep, it's vague, because his concepts are off, and because his concepts are off, his observations aren't well aligned with reality. He just said that ends up being the entire approach. He's an empiricist, but he tries to conceptualize, but failed. He failed in his conceptualization, and I applaud him. I really do. I know it sounds condescending, and maybe it kind of is, but he failed. It's like you're an architect, but you can't really develop a new kind of building. You're a good draftsman, and you can help out other high concept architects, but you can't really do the work yourself. You can't really do what architecture is about. And it's true that clarity comes from acceptance, but acceptance also comes from clarity. And we need that clarity. We need to get intellectual about this stuff. Yeah, I have in parentheses there. It's true. Emotional clarity comes from intellectual acceptance. Comes from the intellectual acceptance that you have no bad parts. There is emotional clarity there, and that does affect how you interact with the world. But also emotional acceptance. If you really want to accept what your emotions are, you need to get clear. I mean, one of those one of those points of clarity is, of course, to distinguish, get really nuanced about the difference between existential responsibility and psychological responsibility. And if you think I'm just, blowing bubbles out my butt, I forget the expression. If you think I'm just blowing bubbles out my butt there, okay, you don't have to do my theory. Go with him. Maybe that's a sign that this would be better therapy for you. Because if you watch this or listen to what I'm saying and you think I'm just full of crap. Depth requires clarity. Everybody wants to go deep, but you need to know exactly what the issues are you're going deep with. Otherwise, you just won't go deep. Or you'll think that you are as deep as you can be, but no giggling, guys. You think you are as deep as you can be, but you don't know because it's not clear. Like, he has this explanation of the child abuser and like how he takes on, what he's doing is he's taking on the energy of his abuser to protect himself. What does that even mean? I mean, that's like a good way of expressing it symbolically, but that's not really what's going on. So we'll go back to the introduction question. Why did I not waste my time with family systems therapy? And what would this indicate about my theory, and how is it different? Well, I think what it indicates is I was able to cut out the collectivism completely and do it right at its root, with all the intellectual backing required. I was able to cut out the collective. The idea that you have an identity based fundamentally on your environment. Now, your environment influences you. Nobody's going to deny that. But does that inform your identity fundamentally? Well, if you think that's true, it's not going to be therapy. And you're going to get to these points in your life. You can go only so deep, and you can get a little bit more clear. And this will definitely show up as, I'm sure, more positive interactions in your life. And if some of these techniques work, then go for it. But I don't know. I can't tell the difference. If you think I'm just being a blowhard here, then just go with internal family systems. If you think I may be onto something, then I would suggest you at least consider. I'm not like the only approach to therapy you can use. I understand I'm just one option for you, but I think consider it to be an option, because I think I can help in ways that IFS can. I mean, like, so much of therapy, so much. I mean, okay, I don't have this written down, but let me just say, so much of our growth comes from looking at a situation exactly for what it is, remaining in that situation. Don't take that triggering person out of the situation. Remain exactly in that context. What emotions come up for you? I can guarantee you, if it's worth bringing up in therapy, it's because you've been in this situation before, and you wanna let go of the past. All this regret and baggage and all this lost time, all this regret, and it's over because it's in the past. I can't work on it. No, it's here right now. But we need to stay in the context in which the issue arises. And in order to do that, we need to know how to communicate in that situation. But in order to do that, we need to learn exactly what emotions are and how they work. Because this informs how we communicate emotions, how we are honest in a healthy way. I know, you think I can't communicate about my emotions because I'll just look weak. And yes, you will look weak based on what you think emotions are and how you consider emotions to be now in your present, range of a perception. But you come to work with me and you learn a different way. And you will be, as I say, the most emotional person, the most emotional man in your zip code. Nobody would ever use that word emotional to describe you. Unfortunately, it's become negative connotation because of guys like this. I could go around in circles about this all day. Thank you guys for watching. animusempire.com/schedule if you want to do a consultation with me. Just if you just want some feedback or whatever, have questions. My goal is to find out whatever I can about you. Your goal can be, it doesn't matter what your goal is. To yell at me, argue. I love it. I love it all. Thank you guys. And as always, I wish you pain and joy that comes from doing whatever we talked about today.